What are you really paying in payment processing fees for your online business? My name is Maria Sparagus, and I work with thousands of merchants and help them figure out all their issues with payment processing and how to convert sales. Today, I'm going to break down for you merchant processing fees, what you're paying, what's advertised, and what the true cost is for your online business. Now, one thing I want to warn you of is the advertised rate is seldomly the rate that you're actually paying. So, we see, for example, on Stripe or on Shopify payments and so forth, 2.9% plus 30 cents. Now, that is the advertised rate, and that is your base rate that you're paying. But keep in mind, there are additional fees. So whether you're working with Stripe or Shopify payments, or you have your own merchant account, you have to understand that the important thing in calculating your merchant processing fees is counting your overall cost, not just the advertised rate, because the advertised rate is just the base cost and there's additional things that are added on top of that. I'm going to focus on merchant processing fees if you have your own merchant account today, but I do have a lot of information and resources and another episode that really talks about Stripe and Shopify payment fees, which I'll link down below. But if you have your own merchant account and you're really confused because there's several pages and there's fees listed everywhere, I'm going to give you an example of one common format, and obviously it can change, and I've seen thousands of different formats, but these are just kind of the best practices and the things that you should be looking out for. So I'll break it down for you so you can understand what you may actually be paying in total. Now, you may have heard the word interchange whenever you're dealing with your merchant processor. What interchange actually means is the fee and the cost that Visa, MasterCard, Discover, whichever card brand we're talking about, is charging for the transaction. So this is essentially cost, right? It's just the cost of processing a transaction, and that is what your payment processor calls interchange. Now, you may have a pricing that's called interchange plus pricing, which is essentially cost plus, or you may have a flat rate, or you may have something called a 3-tier rate. Now, most payment processors right now are moving towards an interchange plus type pricing because it is more clear and it's more transparent to you as a business owner as to what you're actually paying to process a transaction. So you'll see what costs are involved with Visa, MasterCard, Discover, Amex, and so forth. And then you'll see the markup and the other fees that your payment processor is making. Now, if you have a flat fee or a 3-tier rate, you may want to consider moving to an interchange plus type pricing because it'll be a lot easier for you to negotiate because you'll understand what you're paying and what the markup is. Now, interchange in the US can vary based on several factors. For example, your merchant category code or the type of business that you are will influence the rates that you're paying. So different types of businesses, for example, grocery stores will pay a lot less than somebody who's selling skin creams online or whatever the case is. So interchange does vary depending on what type of merchant you are. And it also varies by card type. So for example, debit cards can go as low as 0.05% and a couple of cents a transaction. Whereas credit cards, like basic consumer credit cards, are around 1.8%. But then if we look at corporate cards or foreign cards or cards with very, very high rewards, like those 2% cash back cards that are gaining in popularity, well, those cards can actually cost 2.5% or more. So, it could be a mix of all three cards that you're getting, three card types that you're getting on your store. So, on average, we say the average interchange cost is 1.8%. But if you have, a consumer product and you're selling a lot of, low ticket items and so forth, where you get a lot more debit, then obviously that drives the cost down. If you're selling something mainly to businesses or to foreign account holders and so forth, well, then you're going to be closer to the 2.5%. But on average, what we're seeing is about 1.8% as the cost of interchange. Now, if we look at an example, like I was saying earlier, if we look at an example of a merchant processing statement, let me show you where your interchange costs show up. So most statements, vary between 2 and 5 pages, depending on how many sales you have and how many different categories of interchange you have. But if you want to take a look at what your average interchange cost is and what you're paying for interchange, obviously you have your total sales amount right at the top. So what you can do is really go to the bottom of the page, because oftentimes most payment processors have kind of like a summary. So that makes it easier for you to understand, what is the total for each category of what you're paying for. And then you can really dig into the fees on the other pages. But oftentimes your interchange fees and what is considered cost, as I was saying earlier, is just called fees. Now, if you see on this statement right here, it says fees due, fees paid, and then net fees due. Now, fees due is basically the total of the fees. So how much are you paying in total in interchange? Then fees paid, oftentimes what happens is many merchant processors will take debits, especially if you have a lot of sales and you have a lot of fees that are due. So they take debits during the month of the fees. So they're not left with one huge debit at the end of the month for your fees. So in this case, for example, we have the fees due, the fees that were paid during the month, and then the net fees due. So the net fees due are essentially what they're going to grab at the end of the month to complete basically the amount of the fees that you owe them. So usually what they'll do is between the 1st and the 3rd of the month, they will collect the fees that were due the previous month. So that's what you'll see really at the end of the statement. You'll see a summary of that. So it's important for you to understand that, fees due, fees paid, net fees due is not an addition. This is just mathematics here, is how much you actually have to pay, how much you've paid during the month, and how much is left. Now, as I said earlier, you might have a flat fee. If you have a flat fee, you will not be seeing interchange listed out there. You'll just be paying, for example, 4% or 3.5%, and that will be total. Now, as I said, if you choose an interchange plus category, it may be more beneficial for you, especially if you have a lot of debit card holders and, just regular typical consumer cards, because the cost for interchange there are a lot lower. But if you do have a flat fee, then what you do is you're just going to multiply that flat fee by your amount of sales, and then that'll tell you what you pay as a total fee, which includes interchange and includes the processor markup. If you're in a interchange plus type pricing, then there's a markup for the processor. Now that plus, what they call plus, is called a discount rate. So the discount rate is essentially what they're charging you. They may call it different things, but merchant discount rate, MDR, is something that you'll hear often, or disc or discount is what you'll see it listed on your merchant processing statement. And if we go back to our statement, here's where you'll likely see it on page 1. So this is a US processing statement, and a lot of payment processors in the US use this type of format. And what you'll see is a discount rate listed right at the top on your first page when you have your summary of sales. So you see here, you have your amount of sales, again, the number of sales that you have, any types of credits or refunds. So you could see credit or refund, that means the same thing. Basically, you're just giving customers back, you're refunding them, and they're usually listed right at the top. And then you will see something called disc, or MDR, merchant discount rate, or discount, the whole word. And now you see in this case here, it says 1.25. So this particular merchant is paying interchange plus 1.25. And the 1.25 is essentially the spread that the merchant processor is charging for their services. And now if we go all the way back to the end of the processing statement, you'll see where it says discount due, discount paid, net discount due. So these are not numbers that you're adding. What we're saying here is discount due. So you're paying the amount on your payment processing fees. And during the month, the processor may be collecting various fees in order to ensure that they don't have to debit all the fees at the end. So it really depends on the relationship and what kind of agreement that you have with your payment processor. Some payment processors will just debit the full amount at the end of the month for the month that has elapsed in terms of fees. Others will just collect at various intervals so they don't have to debit a huge amount at the end. And then others will just take it out daily. So you can ask your payment processor, whether you have daily debits for fees or whether it's a lump sum debit at the end of the month. Now, obviously, for accounting purposes, I do think that one debit at the end of the month is usually more convenient for reconciliation. Although, obviously, if you're processing a lot and it's a lot of money, it may be tougher to budget. So you have to decide, and you can usually make that decision yourself. You can talk to your payment processor and tell them what you prefer. Now, if they've had a hard time collecting from you in the past, they may force you to do it daily or at regular intervals because they may not want to wait until the end of the month to debit you. Now, in addition to your discount rate and your interchange fees, there's always a per transaction fee, and that is a fee that you get charged every every time you submit a request for a transaction with your payment processor. So most of the times, whether the transaction is declined or approved, you will get charged something called an authorization fee or a sales transaction fee or whatever the case is. But you can see in your statement most of the time the word authorization fee, and sometimes the number of transactions that you're charged for is higher than the actual sales that you've made. And that's because obviously you may have some declined transactions, but they still charge you for those. So you need to dig into your processing statement in order to find that. You can do a quick Control F and look for authorization, and you'll be able to see how much you're paying. Now, Stripe charges 30 cents per authorization fee. Most payment processors will charge between 5 and 30 cents as well. And usually on your payment processing statement, you'll see it listed as a line item amongst many other items. So in this case, as you can see here, we have an authorization fee. It doesn't tell you the per transaction amount. It often doesn't. So you just have to divide the fees by the number of transactions, and you'll see how much you're paying per transaction. Now, another monthly fee that's common, and it's becoming a big forefront in payment processing because Visa is trying to limit the amount of fraud and trying to make sure that customer data is protected. It's called a PCI compliance fee. So usually when you sign up to any payment processor, you have to attest whether you're PCI compliant. Now, if you're not using your own technology to process payments, for example, you're using Authorize.net, NMI, Shopify payments, and so forth, what you're saying is that you're outsourcing the security of your customers' data to another party, to a gateway or to a payment processor and so forth. So that is, something that you just have to do a quick scan on your website. It'll attest that everything is secure, that you're using a security certificate and there's no leaks on your website, and then you're considered PCI compliant. Keep in mind that you will have to do the PCI compliance scan every year, once a year, and it is your responsibility to get that done. So if you get that done, usually you just pay, a $10 to $20 fee to maintain that compliance. If you are non-compliant, the fees can be exorbitant. I mean, I see this all the time. A lot of merchants don't understand that they're paying, sometimes upward of $150 a month because they're not compliant. And sometimes even further, if you're a very high volume merchant, so that could be dollar volume or transaction volume if you have a lot of transactions. So if you're doing about $12 million or more per year, and if you have, a certain number of transactions, you may actually have to pay a penalty, a percentage of your sales as a penalty for not being PCI compliant. So, these little hidden things are included in the payment processing fee. So I'm going to show you in this statement where it is. So you see PCI non-compliance assessment fee. In this case, he's paying quite a hefty amount here because he is a very high volume merchant and he is not PCI compliant. So in addition to paying over here a PCI monthly fee of $10, he's also paying something called an SAQ scan incomplete. So he has not done his PCI scan. It's called an SAQ. So he's paying $29.99 for that. And he's paying a penalty per transaction because he's not PCI compliant, because he is a high volume merchant. So this can cost you a lot of money. It can be very hidden in your statement. You may not notice, but that's why it's so important to read your statement and take a look at what the fees are. Now, in addition to that, you'll have a monthly fee, that could be $10 to $100, for example. If you're a high risk merchant, it could be closer to the $100 mark because they may have some extra monitoring tools and so forth. So you should know what your monthly fees are. And then the rest of the fees here listed are the interchange fees and the categories. Now, you can Google all these or use ChatGPT to really know what each of the fees mean, but oftentimes, as you can see here listed, they're just various interchange fees. And as I said, on average, we're looking at 1.1% for consumer interchange, a little bit higher if you're doing, in the 2.53% range, if you're doing a lot of commercial cards, a lot of foreign cards and so forth. But these are just all the different fees from Visa or MasterCard or Amex or Discover. And all you really want to know is what the total is, right? I mean, you can't break down all the fees. And also keep in mind that unfortunately, there's nothing that you can do to negotiate these fees. These are coming directly from the card networks. So even if you call your payment processor and you say, what is this assessment fee? It seems like I'm paying a lot. That is from Visa directly. So your payment processor actually has no pull on that and cannot change that. What you can change on your merchant account fees are your discount rate, your per transaction fee for authorizations, perhaps a PCI compliance fee, your monthly fees, and then maybe even your chargeback fee. Now, as I mentioned, you have your flat fees that are just monthly costs. One thing that you have to keep in mind is chargeback fees. So that's what we would call a conditional fee. So that means if you get chargebacks, you get charged a chargeback fee. If you don't get any chargebacks, obviously you pay nothing there. So if you have chargeback fees, they're usually ranging between $25 and $30, depending on what type of industry you're in, depending on the risk level of your business and the negotiation, obviously, that you have with your payment processor. Now, you have to keep in mind one thing. If you have a chargeback, you not only lose the transaction amount, but you also get charged a fee. If you win that chargeback back and you dispute it and you get the money back, you get back the transaction amount that you lost, but you don't get back the chargeback fee. That is lost, unfortunately. So it is important to minimize chargebacks as much as possible, because these are just fees that are going to come and you will not be able to recuperate. And now, if you do have chargeback fees, they will be listed. Now, if we go back to our statement here, we'll look at chargeback fees and you'll see it's listed here, chargeback fee, $125. So you'll see right above that this particular merchant has 5 chargebacks. And this is the amount that he lost in terms of transactions. So he lost 1,751, and that's the transaction amount. That's not the chargeback fees. If you look down below, he's also charged $125, which is $25 per chargeback. So now if he disputes those transactions and wins it back, he will win back the amount, but he's still at a loss, $25 per transaction. So those are the main fees that you should be looking out for. There are some other kind of hidden or lesser known fees that you also have to keep in mind when you're looking at your merchant processing statement. One thing that I see commonly is something called a refund fee. Now, most payment processors will only charge you an authorization fee in order for you to process a refund. So you would pay, 10 cents, 20 cents, or whatever the case is, or whatever authorization fee you have as a refund transaction fee. Some other processors are now starting to penalize merchants with higher refunds, or sometimes some extra hidden fees that you may not notice, and could be charged $1, $2, and I've seen upwards of $3 every time you have a refunded transaction. So take a look and see anything that says credit transaction fee or refund transaction fee. If you have it listed there, that's definitely something that you want to negotiate with your payment processor, because there's no reason for them to be charging you an extra fee for refunds. It should just be whatever your authorization fee or your per transaction cost fee is. Now, some other things that you have to keep in mind: if you're on an interchange plus type pricing, usually you're paying your interchange plus a markup. If you're on a flat fee rate, oftentimes there's also a markup for cross-border fees or foreign currency fees or anything that's outside of your home country. If you're a US merchant selling to Americans and 10% of your sales are outside of the US, you have to take a look to see if you're getting charged anything that would be called a cross-border fee or anything that would be called a foreign transaction fee, because those could be tacked on. Most of the time when you're on Interchange Plus, they are not, because Interchange covers the cost of foreign transactions or various currency transactions and so forth. Now, if you see that and you're on an Interchange Plus category, that's definitely something that you should bring up with your payment processor. If you're on a flat fee or something called a 3-tier, so 3 different tiers of rates, then oftentimes when you're selling outside of your home country, you will get charged an extra fee for foreign transactions. So it can really add up quite a bit. And that's why I recommend for most online business owners to really try to get priced as an Interchange Plus, so you can know what you're paying for. You don't get any hidden surprises after. Now, a couple of other things that you have to keep in mind is you may also have a reserve. So a lot of online businesses, especially in the high risk arena, may be subjected to reserves from their payment processors, and you will be able to see that in your merchant processing statement. Oftentimes it's called an adjustment. So an adjustment is basically money that they're holding in a reserve fund for their risk purposes. So keep in mind, you have to look out to see if there's any reserves. And if you have an agreement with your payment processor that they're allowed, for example, to hold $50,000 in reserves, then you have to keep an eye out when they get to the $50,000 to ensure that they're not collecting anymore. So make sure you understand what the reserve terms are, what they're collecting every month on your monthly statement, and you keep tabs to ensure that they're not collecting anymore and there's no issues on that, because that could be obviously a huge profit drain for you. Now let's summarize what all these costs are. So as you remember from the beginning, there's interchange, or the cost of a transaction from a card network like Visa and MasterCard and so forth. And that is a rate that obviously nobody has control over, and every single payment processor will be charging you what they call interchange. In addition to interchange, you will have something called a discount rate, or an MDR, or a DISC, if you see DISC on your statement. And that is the amount of the markup that your payment processor is charging you. Now, this fee is something that you can negotiate, but one thing I do have to mention to you, a payment processor needs to make money on your account in order to support it. So it will never be zero, because if it's zero or very close to zero, anytime there's a blip or there's something that happens with your account, they may decide to close it a lot easier, because they may not be making, a nice enough spread in order to support you. So if you are a low risk business, you may see that be 0.1, 0.2, or 0.3%. If you are a high risk business, you could see plus 2% or 3% or whatever the case is. It really depends on your business type, the amount of chargebacks that you have, the amount of risk that your business carries. And keep in mind, obviously, that is the fee that you can negotiate, but also keep in mind that the more that you negotiate that fee down, the less likely they are to support you if there's a problem. So you have to make sure that it's a fair rate and it makes sense for your business. In addition to that discount rate, you have an authorization fee that's usually, between 5 and 30 cents, depending on your payment processor. And that's charged for all sales and non-sales transactions, for example, decline transactions or refunds and so forth. So that is an additional fee on there. And then you have, in addition to these two fees, you have fixed monthly costs. So you can have your PCI compliance, PCI non-compliance fee. You can have, maybe a yearly customer service fee, or you may have a statement fee. So it's important to list out those monthly costs and see what they are. Oftentimes, I see over $150 of monthly costs that are just these random fees that make absolutely no sense. So you just keep a note of what they are, and keep in mind, if you're a high risk business, that can get to between $50 and $100, because there are some different things that processors need to do in order to support high risk businesses. If you're in a low risk category, usually, between $10 and $30 is what you're looking at as a base monthly fee. Now, after that, as I mentioned, you have chargeback fees and maybe refund fees. And obviously, as I mentioned, if you have refund fees, you try to drive that down as much as possible. Chargeback fees, you try to drive that down as much as possible by trying to limit the amount of chargebacks that you have by having good practices in your online store. So those are conditional fees. When they happen, you get charged for it. So it's important to just know what you're getting charged for these two things. And lastly, as I mentioned, you may have some reserves or some money being held back. So it's important to understand what is being held back. So this is a quick rundown of your merchant processing fees. And obviously every scenario is different. Every business is different. It can vary closer to 3.5% or 4%, or sometimes even closer to 6 or 7%, depending on your business type. But the important thing is for you to arm yourself with knowledge to understand what you're paying, because then you can better negotiate and understand what kind of fees that you're actually paying. And keep in mind that there are some confusing things on the statement and so forth. You can use ChatGPT, you can use Google and so forth to really Google that so you can understand what the terms mean. And then obviously you do that once, and the future months, you'll understand what all these fees mean. But it is also important that you look at this on a monthly basis. Every month, things can change. You can get more chargebacks. So you may get a high risk fee tagged on there, or pricing may change. You have to keep in mind, once a year, most payment processors increase their fees. So you have to look out for any emails that you've been sent by your payment processor, and you have to look at your payment processing statement, your month-end statement, to see what fees you're being charged. And usually right at the beginning of the year in January, or sometimes, they have an April or May increase, they could be increasing by a couple of pennies and so forth. And that's a good time maybe to call and try to renegotiate your fees. I hope you found this information useful. And if you need any help reading your payment processing statement, feel free to contact me or somebody from my team at DirectPayNet. We will help you understand it. We will help you understand where you can save money. And we can also help you get a lower cost payment processor for your business. We work with thousands of merchants, and we help them find reliable and cost-effective payment processing. So feel free to drop me a line down below with any questions or anything I can help you in the future, and have yourself a great day.